All right. Do you mind repeating it so people can hear what you asked me?
Sure. So I would like to know how to implement this enrichment framework as a prevention, as a preventative measures, like, once we have a problem, how we going to use the enrichment frameworks to solve that problem. So I want to do it before the problem arises, but without really quantifying. I don't know how to wrap my head.
Yeah. I love this question. So this course, we're probably going to shorten the title, but the full title of the course is the Enrichment Framework for Behavior Consulting, right? And the reason that we called it that is because we're talking about how to use the enrichment framework to specifically address maladaptive behaviors in the context of behavior consulting. But what we certainly didn't mean to imply by offering this course is that the enrichment framework is only meant for behavior consulting, right? Because the SPIDER framework, as it was originally created for zoos and aviaries and aquariums, they're not always dealing with maladaptive behaviors. They're just dealing with, like, how do we take good care of the animals in our care, right? So the enrichment framework, you do always have to have a goal, but that goal doesn't have to always be changing a maladaptive behavior, right? So what that looks like in zoos, when they're doing the SPIDER framework, they're doing a lot more work on the front end of making sure that we're looking at the ethogram of the species. What are the species' typical behaviors? And they look at the activity budgets of this. Well, they look at behavioral diversity, right? So what is the level of diversity of the species' typical behaviors that individuals in the wild offer, right? So how many behaviors approximately are they doing every day? And then they look at the activity budget, which is what is the percentage of time of day that they're spending foraging versus resting versus exploring, investigating versus habitat nest building or whatever, right? And so how do we break down the percentages that we're looking for in the day of these different types of behaviors? And then how can we create an environment that allows animals in our care to map that as closely as possible? So what are we trying to get? What are we trying to, what are we aiming for? What is healthy, what does physical, behavioral, and emotional health look like for this species, right? It's a little bit trickier with domesticated animals because we've been selectively breeding them into, different breeds and breed types. But that doesn't mean that there's such a thing as breed specific enrichment, because lots of complicating factors, right? But it does actually complicate things because there isn't one standard ethogram for all dogs. There isn't one, well, I would say there is this one standard ethogram for dogs, but where it changes with the different breeds is probably more in the diversity and the activity budget area, right? So all dogs are species typical behaviors for all dogs include things like digging, chewing, barking, but some breeds are going to be more or less likely to bark, and some breeds are going to be more or less likely to chew, and some breeds are going to be more or less likely to dig, right? So it is more complicated with domesticated animals, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. And so what we're looking at when we're talking about, we've got these puppies, and we want to make sure that they end up becoming physically, behaviorally, and emotionally healthy as much as we have control over, because there's a bunch of aspects of their behavior that we don't have control over. But insofar as we have influence over their behavior, what are our goals? And our goals are what is typical for dogs in general, and perhaps what is typical for this individual species, for this individual animal, right? So if I see a puppy that is really chatty, boop, 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 right? Then I'm going to say, okay, this dog is probably likely to continue being chatty in the future. And as this dog ages, barking is probably going to be a thing that this dog is going to do. And we can anticipate how that can look in a behaviorally healthy dog and how that can look in a behaviorally unhealthy dog. So what we're going to start working on with this dog who's got a lot to say is teaching them games or contexts in which they can bark and boof, and teaching them quiet skills so that they can, shut their mouths when we need them to, and the pet parents learn how to do that and how to think about that in that situation. But we also want to make sure that this dog, there are things that we can map, right? Like we know that dogs as a species are really designed to rest about 18 hours a day, 18 to 20 hours a day. That does not mean that they should be asleep or confined for 18 hours a day, because rest doesn't always look like being curled up on a bed asleep, right? Rest can look like, just hanging out somewhere and working on a licky toy, or getting up and moving and hanging out by the window, but they're at rest. They're not doing a lot of activities during that time. So yes, even Huskies and Malinois are still dogs. And so we're still looking for a dog who has a few hours a day of activity opportunities, but for most of the day is allowed to and able to rest and just be kind of down, low arousal, right? We could call that low arousal instead of rest. That's just all dogs. All dogs. Dogs are mammals. This is what mammals do. Mammals are pretty lazy compared to all the other animals in the world. So we could design a routine for dogs that includes lots of rest in the middle of the day, periods of activity in the morning and the evening, and then obviously sleeping at night, right? We can say that all dogs need to forage. That is a species-wide behavior regardless of what the breed is. And so we're going to teach these dogs how to work for their food by finding food with their nose, because food acquisition through tracking and trailing is part of being a dog. All dogs are going to need that, so we can include that into our program, right? And I mean, so there are things like that that are going to be kind of just blanket things across species, like foraging and rest. And then we can look at the pattern behaviors of the individual dog and let them kind of tell us which of the species typical behaviors on the canine ethogram they are particularly primed to do, right? Yeah, I'm just going to keep going with this thought before I switch thoughts. So the barking was one example. Let's talk about another example. If we have a puppy who's digging a lot, then we know that we need to provide a digging pit for that dog. That does not mean that every dog needs a digging pit. My two dogs, they don't dig. That's not a behavior that I've ever seen either of them do. So I'm not going to create a digging pit for them, because that's not a species typical behavior that they're prone to exhibit, right? But if I see a puppy who is digging a lot, I'm going to say, this dog likes to dig. So for this dog, we're going to be very clear up front before this becomes a problem, where this puppy can dig, and make that place really reinforcing. And we're going to use management to prevent them from being able to dig in other places. And we probably want to teach them replacement behaviors so that if the dog starts to dig somewhere else, we can call them away and they'll really reliably come away and do something else instead, right? If we see a puppy who's really nippy, bitey, mouthy, this is a dog who's showing us that using their mouth and is part of their one of their behaviors, is in their behavioral repertoire. And so we need to teach them, give them opportunities to bite places that are more appropriate, like on specific toys, and teach them what to do instead in contexts that we don't want to see that behavior, right? So you still have goals. They're just preventing maladaptive behaviors instead of addressing them. And the thing that I'm trying to emphasize over and over and over again is that regardless of their breed, you build your plan around the behaviors that the individual is offering, not around what somebody has told you that this breed does, right? Because not every dog of a certain breed got the memo that they're supposed to behave like everybody else in their breed. And when it comes to mixed breeds, all bets are off, right? I mean, for that matter, like Dr. Eleanor Carlson's work is showing that even dogs who are just bred for form, not function, who are just bred to look like a retriever, not actually be a retriever, don't even necessarily have strong breed tendencies anyway, right? So that's how you use the framework for an animal that doesn't have any problems yet, and you're just wanting to like build physical, behavioral, and emotional health. The caveat, the reason I had that moment where I paused and I was like, nope, I'm going to stay on track, is because the caveat to that is that sometimes, even at a very young age, puppies can not exhibit a whole lot of species typical behaviors if they've been under socialized, right? I hesitate to call that maladaptive, but it kind of is. Like, you know, if they haven't learned how to be a dog, then that is kind of maladaptive, right? So what we're seeing with some of these puppies who have just been from a very young age just taught to, like, you know, hang out. I'm thinking specifically of a trainer in Utah who teaches all of her trainers and all of their clients that a dog should know how to rest in a crate for 20 hours a day. Like, that's just life. And so these puppies who've gone to that facility's puppy class are really kind of creepy in that they just, you know, from a very young age, they've just been taught that confinement is their life. And so they just kind of exist and they just don't do a lot. What?
That's pretty sad.
Yeah, it is. So for dogs, so that's why I had that moment where I was like, I want to talk about this, but we'll talk about it now. If you have an animal who's not exhibiting a lot of species typical behaviors one way or another, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to include those behaviors in our goal. Having said, watch what the individual is offering and build an enrichment framework around that, or an enrichment plan around that. I don't mean if the dog's not offering any behaviors, then don't offer anything. That's, you know, that's not it, right? What I do, however, with animals like that is my enrichment plan starts with the behaviors that I know, like, all dogs need to do, right? So all dogs need to be able to forage. All dogs need to be able to explore and investigate. All dogs in the pet home environment need to be able to interact with their person and communicate if they like something or not. And in my experience, what happens with those animals is it's kind of like you have to it's like a snowball building in, like, as it rolls downhill, right? You have to get them kick-started by teaching some behavioral diversity, teaching them how to do some things like foraging and affiliative behaviors and offering opportunities for play. And then once they start doing that stuff, they kind of come alive on their own and their personality comes out. And then we start to see what behaviors they're going to offer. And then we can really shape or hone those behaviors. But if the animal's not offering a whole lot of behaviors at all, other than like sleeping, eating, and sitting in a crate, then you do need to like teach them some of the basics that we know all dogs need. And then when you get to that reassess, readdress, and do it again part, you're like, okay, now what are you offering me? Now that we've done the stuff that we know for sure we needed to do, now what behaviors am I seeing from you? And then you can build on that, right?
So in this case, will you give the checklist to the client, or you still kind of do that on your head? What will be helpful to you?
I almost always do it in my head. The only time I'm actually doing a full checklist or having a client do a full checklist is when I'm not clear on what needs are being met or unmet, and I need the client to work with me to kind of figure that out. But if we're talking about prevention with puppies, unless the puppy's already coming to you with some maladaptive behaviors where we have to be like, okay, we need to do an inventory here and figure out why this is. I think you can do a lot of that in your head by just figuring out what is their schedule and routine, and what are they already doing well with that puppy, and what maybe needs to be addressed or taught, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments?
I'm pretty behind on the
Okay.
on the enrichment opportunities, so I haven't really done that much. One
That's
other question.
valid.
This is with the deal with agency. That's something that, you know, I kind of knew that, but now that it's right in front of me, I'm really paying attention to it. I'm really liking that. So I'm implementing that a lot.
Good.
I think one of the question is like, for example, you cannot give choice to the animal for some reason, but the choices can be for them to say no, right?
Right.
So I have to do this, but you can say no. So that's still agency, right?
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
even if they don't have two desirable choices, they only have one, but they can say no. And
well, it is
Yeah.
a desirable choice, right? In that there's a difference between saying, if you do the right thing, you get a treat, and if you do the wrong thing, you get zapped by an e-collar, right? That's the cake or death analogy. There's a difference between that and saying you can choose to engage with this, or you can choose to walk away from it, right? There's no stick with the walking away from it. There's no, if we're talking about like the carrot and the stick, like do it, you get food, don't do it, you get shocked. That's a carrot and the stick dichotomy. But if you're saying you can choose to engage or you can choose to walk away, there's no stick happening here. It's all carrots. You either get to do it or you get to not do it, and that's your choice, right? So it's still two desirable options. They're just getting different things out of it. They're not getting the same thing for both choices. That said, I often do give them both for both choices. So if I'm teaching like the relaxation protocol or a start button behavior, something like that, I pay them food for coming and doing the thing, and I pay them food for choosing to not do it. I pay them to go away. So I actually do offer the same thing for both, but food is, I think food is supplemental, or it should be, right? Because if you're getting food in either way, then the other motivator is engaging with it. They're choosing to engage because they're getting something else out of it too. Usually what they're getting out of it is interaction with us, right? And if they choose not to engage, they're getting relief from something they're not interested in or they don't want, and or they're getting to explore something else, and or they're getting rest or break or relaxation or whatever. So the food is more like supplementary feedback, like, yes, awesome, I love that you're choosing to engage with me, here's some chicken for that. Yes, awesome, I love that you're choosing to go off and take a break, here's some food for that as well, right? But for both of those choices, they're getting something out of it that they want. Even if getting something out of it is relief, that's still something that they want. And also we're using food as a feedback of like, hooray, you did an awesome thing. Hooray, you did an awesome thing. Everything that you're doing here, all of your choices are awesome, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So one of the things that I was hoping to get done this week, and it didn't happen, I'll try to get it done next week, is going through an actual case. I'll do one of each. So I was going to go through the whole process to show you what it looks like to just do it in my head. But because of our conversation today, I'll do one that's like preventative puppy, behaviorally healthy animal. And then I'll do one that's like dealing with a maladaptive behavior so that you can see both. And like, I'll talk through the process in my head. So whenever I get that done, I'll incorporate the preventative enrichment plan so you can see both of them, what both of them look like. All
That'd
right.
be great.
Cool. All right. Good deal. Anything else?
That was it for me.
Okay.
Was just coming to listen today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for showing up and asking that question because it was a great question.
Sure. Okay.
All right. Have a good day. I'll see you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.